Hey guys, welcome to Money Matters, and we are going to have an exciting episode today. And we have Lacey Filipich here today from Money School, who has done me a great honor of being a guest speaker. Welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much, Mathura. I'm delighted to be chatting with you.
Yes, I think it's the beginning of the year, and a lot of people. This is the time I think most people will seriously rethink their financial goals. Oh my God, what have I done at the end of last year? And panic about what they have done and start maybe taking some positive steps towards it. And I think today's episode will definitely help them towards taking the right steps in a way. Just want to get a glimpse into your background and all of that. How did you end up in this scene of financial literacy, or basically getting people to make wiser decisions with regards to money?
Yeah, I've definitely got a non-linear story with this one. I I didn't start out thinking I was going to be teaching people about money or writing about money. I'm actually a chemical engineer.
Yep.
So I loved maths and physics at school, loved problem solving, chose engineering by a process of elimination. Didn't want to be a teacher, didn't want to be a scientist in a lab coat, didn't want to be a lawyer. Oh, engineering sounds okay. And so I went into that, and you did a generic first year. So I tried all the different types of engineering and went, oh, I don't like those 10. I'll give chemical a shot. And then just turned out to be fabulous. But as I was going through that process of, studying and all that kind of stuff, my mum was teaching me about money. And she started when I was quite young, and I think I was 10 when I decided I'd start saving half of every dollar. It was because she taught me about compound interest. And that was enough to sort of plant the seed. And then when I was 19, in my second year of uni, I bought my first investment property and kept investing. So although I was doing engineering, I was learning about money and interested in money. And that came really in useful in my second half of my 20s, when I had a burnout experience at work. Those, you think you're invincible, you can just push yourself to the limit, and it turns out you're not. Your body will give up if you push it too hard. So I had that experience and was able to take a break from work. And my friends were all saying to me, how come you can take time off, Lacey? Like, we have to work. I've got, credit card bills to pay and a car loan to pay. And why do you have to? You're like, why are you able to stop working?
Yep.
And that was when I was like, well, I've been saving and investing, and I'm starting to earn dividends from my shares and rent from the properties because I've paid down the debt. So, sorry, did no one teach you this stuff? That was my first, like, oh, wow. I hadn't realized that no one taught them, and
Yeah.
I think I'm just lucky. I won, as I say, the ovarian lottery. I got my mum. And it was pure luck that I had that. And that was the first time I went, oh gosh, this is not fair. People need to learn this stuff, and we need to be able to teach people how to manage their money and to grow their wealth. And so that's how I ended up in finance. I started Money Schools of Business nearly 13 years ago now. And that's been going for, quite a while. And it started out teaching parents how to teach their kids about money, because I think that's a good fit. But it's kind of morphed into teaching kids directly and teaching adults directly, because it turns out there was a lot of adults who were like, yeah, it's nice that you want me to teach my kids, but could you just teach me, because I didn't learn.
Yes, I think a lot of adults also need help, and I am very happy that you address both the crowds as well. But for someone like you, okay, if I am looking from outside and if I'm meeting you for the first time in this call, I'm gonna say like, wow, you seem to have it all like figured out. You have all your money stuff figured out. There's no way you could make mistakes, and I think that's what most of us feel towards everybody else we see in the outside world. We think they are not making any mistakes, they're getting everything right, and we are the only ones who seem to make all the mistakes in the world. So I'm gonna like break that ice for everybody and kind of like dive deep into, were there any mistakes that you made that you remember till now and you were like, I'm never gonna make it ever again?
Yes, definitely. I have plenty of mistakes. And just to reassure anybody who's thinking, oh no, they've got it all figured out, I still make mistakes.
Yep.
Still, and I think that you've got to accept that you will make mistakes. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, sometimes you're not in the best mental state to make good decisions, right? Yeah. Sometimes you're under financial stress. That actually lowers your IQ by 13 points. And so it means your decision-making power is less effective than it would normally be. So if you've made a mistake in those circumstances, please don't beat yourself up. It's a temporary thing. It's the result of not having enough money. But then there's also mistakes that you make because you genuinely didn't know better. Sometimes it's you took a punt, you thought it was going to go one way and it went the other. And other times it was like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that, So there's things like that crop up all the time because there's so much to know. So I just wanted to put that general sort of context for people first, because if you're making mistakes, that's good. It means that you're trying and you're learning, and expect to make them all the way through your life. The aim is to not repeat mistakes. Avoidable ones. That's the way I think about it. So look, there's a couple that absolutely stand out for me. Probably the most expensive one was a property related one. So because property is so expensive, when you make a mistake there, it can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars if you really stuff up, right? Whereas, when you start with shares, you're starting with, $500 worth, if you make a mistake there, it's not going to ruin you. When you make mistakes with property, you might end up in severe trouble because usually you're using debt. Now, luckily for me, this was on my 5th property purchase. So it was a fair way down the track. But that's another point there. I'd done very well on the previous 4, and on the 5th one was the one that I made a big stuff up. So I think that's another sort of just reassurance for everybody that you will continue to make these mistakes. And my mistake was to rush. So we were moving to the United States, and we didn't own a property together, my husband and I. Was then my boyfriend, now husband. And we were really keen to have a toehold in the market before we went, because we were worried that prices were going to increase. And in Perth, where I'm based in Western Australia, we had both lived through this period between 2005 to 2007 where house prices just went ballistic. They nearly doubled in some areas. And we were worried that we were going to go away. There'd be another mining boom, and we'd come back and suddenly everything would be really unaffordable. Now, we had been investing together in investment properties, but we were thinking this would be our long-term home. So that was the other thing. We were kind of like, well, if we want to live here, maybe we need something in the market so that if we come back, we can buy and sell in the same market, and you've got that leverage, right? So we rushed. I only found out, I think, on like the 3rd of March that we were going to the States, and we left on the 1st of April. So we had 28 days. So that was the thing. We were like, we've got to get through. We're just going to, what's on the market now? We'll buy something. And I think that was, do not rush property. Just don't do it. No matter what the pressure is, there'll be another property that comes up. But in my mind, it was this real imperative. So we didn't take the time to do the due diligence that we normally would have done about the neighbourhood. And unfortunately, we ended up with some absolutely shocking neighbours, like really unlucky. Now, normally I would, so Rich Dad, Poor Dad's a book that I've read. I really like some of the stuff in there. He's a bit on the nose for a lot of people, which I understand. I wouldn't be following his social media. I think he's made some questionable choices, but some of his stuff about how to understand whether a property might be a good investment or not. He talked about, you visit the property 50 times at different days, at different nights. You go knock on the doors of the neighbours, you go see who you're around, really taking that time. And I had done that previously, and I didn't with this one. I would have been able to uncover this problem if I'd taken my time. So that was the first thing. We bought a property near to permanent undesirable neighbours, which makes that a real problem if you're going to live in it. It's less of a problem if you're going to rent it, but we did eventually move in when we came back from the States and I was having my first child, and that's when we discovered the problem. And so, one of those times you go, oh no. So that was an avoidable mistake. The second part of that, of course, that meant that it wasn't as financially lucrative as it would have been in other circumstances was we had a downturn. Australia has had, and it's still, we still look reasonably good, 30 years of economic growth, but there was just a little downturn in Perth, so we didn't make as much money back. So I actually, in real terms, lost about 80 grand when we eventually sold that property. And I'm really glad to not have to worry about it anymore, because I found it quite stressful. And the people who were buying it were renting it. So we were like, oh, well, they're going back to the rental. It's, their choice. And there has been a lot of work with the neighbours. It's a Department of Housing, a block of flats. And so they've been getting involved, but it's one of those things that you just go, we're better off leaving. So cutting your losses and going, well, we'll take that money. So that's probably the biggest one. But it didn't affect our financial independence because we had built up enough other assets by then. And I think that's that point about diversity. If you've got a reasonable portfolio and you're not just tied to one thing or one particular asset class, then you're not as at risk. So that was the good thing for us. I still was annoyed. I didn't want to lose that money.
Who likes losing?
Exactly. But we walked away with cash. There wasn't a debt on it. I think it would be terrible for people if you're going to sell the house and you still had debt to pay off. So I think that's why you've got to be careful with those things. And look, my first property was in the order of $100,000. That one was $500,000. That's why you want to start small. Make
Yes.
your mistakes on the smaller one if you can, and don't rush.
I like that a lot. But I'm just curious, like making the decision to cut loss and actually move on, because like you said, it did start affecting your other aspects of life a whole lot more. So when do you choose to like prioritize the other things more, and when do you choose to prioritize the financials more?
Oh, great question. Look, I would say I mostly prioritize the other stuff these days. So because I've accumulated enough that I don't have to grow quickly,
Yeah.
I apply the sleep well test. Will I sleep well at night?
Uh-huh.
Am I sleeping well now? If I find I'm thinking about it when I should be with my family and paying attention, or it's keeping me up at night or anything like that,
Yep.
I say, look, it's probably not worth it. Now, early on, obviously, when you are learning, things can feel stressful and unknown. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily just feeling uncomfortable because you're not clear isn't a good reason to cut your losses. But if it's genuinely stressing you out, like I mentioned, that 13 IQ point drop, that is from Princeton University research from 2013. It's pretty well established now. And the thing about that IQ drop is that it doesn't just affect your money, it affects everything. You make worse decisions in your relationships and in your career. So I think the potential downside financially, from relationship breakdowns, losing important friends and family, from maybe making poor job choices, probably outweighs the financial loss. So that's what I think you've got to kind of take that holistic approach where it feels like, I'm going to lose this money now, but am I going to therefore be able to do better with what I've got, find less stress, and therefore make better decisions everywhere? Most of the time, I would say that sleep well test is pretty good for that. You just got to get used to differentiating between discomfort because I don't understand something, and that you can learn to understand it, versus discomfort because this is not a good fit for me. This is not aligned with my values. This is not how I want to spend my time, that kind of stuff. So I think that's an important distinction.
Yes, I love that, because literally a few days ago we were running a program, and we had a group of students who had to learn this completely new concept with regards to machine learning and AI, and I could literally sense the whole room go like, nope, I am not like, they just dropped it out. And then I'm like, you guys have to keep an open mind. If not, you're not even going to be able to understand it. So being open-minded enough and being comfortable enough in the discomfort, I think matters a lot, so that you can continue learning. I think one topic that most youngsters ignore or don't really find fun to talk about is, of course, financial independence, or retirement, as some people call it. And they go like, I'm too young for this. I'll look into this when I'm, much older. And then it's too late for most of them. And I think that's what you highlighted in your book as well. So what should a youngster know about financial independence?
And I think the knowing about's the important part, right? It might not be something you aim for, but my theory with this is, if you're aiming for financial independence, all the things you do to get there help your money situation improve. It doesn't matter if you don't get to financial independence or not. It's going to be better for you. So why not take the shot? Because you just might make it. So I think when we talk about financial independence, there's lots of different definitions, but the kind of standard one in what they call the FIRE community, the Financial Independence Retire Early community, is the assets that you own pay enough of an income to cover your living costs. So instead of needing to work, you get what it might be: dividends from shares, it might be coupons from bonds, it might be interest from cash in the bank, it could be rent from properties. The assets that you own cover that living costs, and those happen regardless of what you're doing with your time, right? It's not about I had to show up in the office to get my rent. And so that's a goal that a lot of people can aspire to. Now, the point that I think everyone gets stuck on, like you said, is young people go, I don't want to retire early. I don't want to sit on the beach. That's boring. And I would agree with you. And it's not really about, for me, I think this is where the FIRE acronym's cute, but not helpful. Most of it's actually not about retiring early. It's about having choice over the way you spend your time. If you get to choose what you do with your time, who you work with, where you work, what you work on, and that's fully a choice for you because you're not worried about being able to pay your bills or your rent or anything like that, then suddenly a world of opportunity opens up, which is exciting and daunting, because some people would prefer the security of, oh no, I have to go to work for my 40 hours a week to earn my money. So I can get why that's a bit weird. But what I would say to people who are going, look, I don't want to retire early, I'm like, me either. I don't really want to retire early. What I like being is time rich.
Yes.
So that's the way I think about it, is financial independence helps you feel time rich. So you have choice over how you spend your time. Now, I know plenty of people who are financially independent who carry on working. They do the same job. They don't change, which is fine. And you probably know people who are like that, but they might not talk about it.
Yeah.
Most of us will know someone like that, but it's not commonly spoken about because it's such a foreign concept for a lot of people who are used to this. Work till your 60s, maybe later, and then retire at the end of your life and take that 10, 20, 30 years at the end.
Yes.
And that's kind of the standard approach. I think with financial independence, you get that flexibility. I've personally used it to have lots of mini retirements. So where I take breaks of, 3 to 6 months at a time from a job,
Yes.
and then you carry back on later. I've also used it for things like when I had children, taking time off without feeling like it's an imperative to go back to work, or when my mother fell ill, I was able to take time off to care for her. So a lot of those are things that you don't expect them to happen, but when they do happen, you're really glad if you've prepared.
Yep.
Or if you haven't, you're like, oh, this would have been really good to not have that pressure of, oh, I've only got so many sick days left or carer days left. So I think it's one of those things, again, even if you don't get to financial independence as your goal, the activities you do to get there will improve your financial situation, and you just might get lucky. And the sooner you start, the better your chances of getting there.
Agreed. One of the things that I've faced with people that I've talked to is that some of them are already in a not so good financial situation. So they are already in debts, they have their credit card debts, and they seem to be overspending pretty much every month, and everything seems to be going wrong. And they have kind of been in this habit or in this environment for a long time, many years, in fact. So for them, even thinking about financial independence it's unimaginable. Like, how can anyone even get there? Someone like me doesn't have the discipline to get there. And that's what they say. So how can someone come out of that level of intense habit patterns and kind of like really start moving towards financial independence?
Yeah, it's a really common problem. And like in Australia, we have one of the highest levels of debt in the world, household debt, twice the average income. That's how much Australians owe.
Wow.
And yeah, it's terrifying. We're big overspenders. So I think there's a couple of things to be aware of with this. So first of all, just because you've felt poor or been in debt doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no character flaw there. Don't say to yourself, oh, I'm bad with money. You might have developed some bad habits. You might have gotten a bit sloppy. That's okay. But there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing that means you can't change, because a lot of it is habit and unconscious. When we get into that habit of overspending, we've got to remember that we live in a capitalist society where everything is built to make you spend. Every time you get on social media, every time you open the email, every time you walk down the street, every time you look at that phone, there's a prompt. Hey, buy something. Choose us. That's what our entire economy is like.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that makes it very hard to be disciplined. Very hard, because you're getting overwhelming messages. So it's not surprising at all that people fall for that, and that they fall for easy options for debt. So for example, in Australia, buy now, pay later, it's called Afterpay here. That's become a huge thing in the last few years. 1 in 5 people on buy now, pay later are going without meals to meet their repayments over here, right? So, and it's because there's this like almost zero friction now. There's no, just sign up for Afterpay. You just do it, or Zip Pay, or whatever it is, just do it, and then you can have it now. The whole environment is about inspiring that instant gratification. And the more you have, the more you want.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the more you have doesn't necessarily make you happy. You get this instant dopamine hit. So your brain goes, woohoo, thanks for spending. This is awesome. And then we've all had that buyer's remorse where a day later you're like, why did I buy that? What a waste of money. So you've got to be aware that your brain is fighting you. Your brain is saying, oh, I see your money. Spend me. Give me some dopamine. And so I think if you're aware of that, suddenly you can do things about it.
Yep.
I think the best thing though with money is so when you think about the messages that we get to overeat or to sit on the couch, the things that make us feel physically unhealthy.
Yep.
Those things require everyday commitment. I must say no to the chocolate and chips. I must get up and do my exercise. They really do require discipline. The beautiful thing about money is you can automate almost all of it. You don't have to, every time a dollar comes in, go, I must save 50 cents. You don't have to do that. You can just set it all up. So I would suggest to people, look, if you're in debt, you need to focus on paying that debt down as quickly as you can, because the sooner you're debt free, the less interest you're paying. And every time you carry that interest, you're paying more, and future you has to give up lifestyle for it. So the sooner you can get rid of it, the better. But once you've gotten that debt sorted, what you want to do is set up an ambitious automated savings process that sends money off to this beautiful little account that's isolated from everything else, that is your savings, and then learn to live with what's left.
Yep.
And most of us will struggle for maybe 6 weeks with that. When we get an increase in our income, it takes us about 5 minutes to mentally spend it. It takes us about 6 weeks to sort of adjust, right, to a reduction in spending. But if you can have that ambitious saving, just like spend what's left, spend on what gives you joy. You don't have to feel, like you're doing without too much. Pick those 1 or 2 things that get you excited, that you really get value out of, and be very conscious about them. So think about when I think about food, I really love cheese, right? So good cheese is my thing. That's my indulgence. Yeah. So, you've got that one thing and you really look forward to it. Whereas if I had the cheese and the chorizo and the olives and the whole thing, you kind of get a bit overwhelmed. It's not as special anymore. Yeah. So pick that 1 or 2 things that you're still going to treat yourself with, so you feel good and you're getting enjoyment, but commit to not use those really easy options for debt going forward. Just don't sign up for them if you can't control yourself with it, because your brain is fighting you. Yeah. Once you've broken that habit for a while, you could look at reintroducing those things if you need to. Yeah. But it's not a good idea if you've fallen into a long-term habit. Give yourself a break from it after you've got that debt paid off.
Yes. Give enough time for the habit to not kick back in a way, which does happen quite a lot for a lot of people. So if because some of the audiences for Money Matters are, of course, school students and teenagers who are watching the show right now. So what are some of the probably one basic concept that they should understand, so they can understand eventually what FITR actually means and how they can make it in their lives?
Yeah, I think the most important thing when you're a teenager, so first of all, lucky you, because most of us would trade places with you just to have what we know now, and the time factor. So you've got this major advantage of time. You can make lots of mistakes. You can go slow and steady. You don't have to even do anything crazy. You can be really conservative. And just the factor that you've got a lot of time ahead of you will be enough to generate enough wealth if you're smart about it. So I think just keep that in mind. But the thing that I often say to young people is, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep. So if you're going to chase a high salary, which I do recommend because it's your quickest lever to getting to financial independence, do everything you can to produce a lucrative and fulfilling career for yourself, because that money you earn is what's going to get you to financial independence. But if every time you earn, you increase your living expenses to match that, you won't get there. Yeah. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep. So getting into that habit of having that automated savings process, and I said habit then, but really you can just set it all up online or through your payroll or whatever you do, make your transfers happen. And you don't have to, keep focusing on it, but taking the time to set up that system at the beginning so that you are automatically saving and ambitiously saving. And every time you get a pay increase, you're saving more, then your chances of getting there are vastly improved. All the different asset types, there's no rules about which ones you have to do. If you like shares, stocks, like bonds, you like property, you like them all, whatever you want, you can do that all. It's a choose your own adventure story. But you do have to keep some of everything you earn for future you, because if you don't, it will just disappear.
Yep, agreed. I like what you mentioned about eventually you can look into the different options like shares and all of that. If a youngster is not coming from a family which is well versed in these topics, how can they take the right step so that they're learning the right thing? Because I think one thing I've faced with a lot of my friends, even when I was studying in university, is that they all somehow will end up in these get rich quick schemes, and that's it, and their money is gone. And I'm like, how did you fall for it? And even if you point it out, they're not able to see it. So how can they ensure they're not falling for those things and actually going for the legitimate ones that they should be looking into?
Such a good point. And look, if you've fallen for one of those schemes before, then you're not a complete sucker. Don't worry. They're very well designed schemes. And look, we've seen a lot of it with cryptocurrency, right? In the last 5 years. That's probably the area where a lot of people have felt but they've been sucked in, or they haven't been fully protected as a consumer. But that's just the latest one. I mean, pyramid schemes go a long way back, you know. And it's because we're humans, right? We go, oh, but why wouldn't I put my money in if I can get 5 times as much back? And look what it's done. And this person's a millionaire. And we fall for it.
Yep.
Because we're humans and we'd like to believe it. I think the moral with the story, if it's too good to be true, it probably is very true. I've got a very high skepticism radar for that stuff. And I think you have to work to cultivate that. So anytime you hear you've got to sign on the dotted line now or you'll miss out, or like, you know, this sense of, oh no, we're closing, you know, any of that, those are sophisticated marketing techniques that are designed to make you feel like you're going to miss out. Yeah. And so that's how they get you to close. So you've just got to, I've always had the approach, well, if you can't give it to me tomorrow instead of today, then I don't want it. And then you'll find out what's a genuine deal and what's not. And you can sort of bypass that immediate gratification kind of stuff. So I think that's, first of all, self-awareness and practice. And if you've lost money that way, consider it a lesson. It's like paying for financial education. You've got some first class experience there. And we all, you know, we're all susceptible. So don't beat yourself up. But I do think something that I see with a lot of financial education that's very recipe driven. We have quite a few recipes, you know, must save 20%, must have 3 categories, you know, save, give, splurge, whatever it is, you know, this whole very regimented. I would encourage young people to remember it is a choose your own adventure story. And there is no absolute right or wrong with most of it. And I keep it to sort of 3 rules: save, buy assets, and avoid bad debt. If you can do those 3, you'll get there. Notice there's no numbers in there. And nothing prescriptive. So I think when you're young and you're trying to find out which type of assets you might like, there's so many options these days that don't require you to risk real money. Mm-hmm. Like I think about, if you're interested in shares, you can sign up for a virtual trading account. So they'll give you virtual money and you can trade it in a live market. So that gives you the experience of, oh, well, how do I decide which share? How do I decide what price to put in? Am I going to go price to limit or price to market? Am I going to time it so that it's before dividends so that I get a dividends thing? Or am I going to wait till it goes ex-dividend and then that comes out? So there's lots of choices that I think people get stuck on, where if you can do it in a simulated way and you're mucking around with virtual money, well, what's the risk?
Yep.
You know, it's pretty low. I think the important thing to remember with those is that most of those brokerage firms make money every time you buy and sell.
Yes.
Because they make brokerage. They don't care what percentage you make. They care about you doing a volume of transactions. Yep. So you've got to remember that a lot of them are built not for people who are just going to buy one big chunk of shares and just keep it for 20 years. They will, in some ways, gamify and incentivize more regular trading. What you've got to then think about for yourself is, am I going to be a day trader? Do I want to do that? Do I want to be looking at charts and looking at these candles and this one's gone red and this one's gone green and I'm ready to buy? Or are you going to do what I think is more common, which is buy things that you plan to hold for a long time because you think they're good value, whether that's an individual company or whether that's a basket of companies, like we would call them exchange traded funds in Australia, or listed investment companies. So you buy one share in that, but you're getting like a share of 200 or, you know, 1,000 companies.
Yep.
You can do those sorts of things, but I think experiential sort of investigation is quite useful in this area, rather than read a book, follow the instructions and off you go. I think books are wonderful. Blogs are wonderful. It's pretty funny that I'm an author of a book saying that. If you like reading, go for it. But experiential learning is the best way that you will find out whether you like a particular investment type or not. And of course, I think the one that's therefore the biggest and most daunting is property, because generally it's quite expensive compared to the other types. So that's one where I think you do probably want to find a mentor. You do want to find people in the local area who are familiar with how the property market works, and you do want to take your time. And I do mean like 6 to 12 months before you commit to buying a property, because you want to be sure that you are not making mistakes like I did, choosing terrible neighbors, or having an issue where you can't develop or subdivide because you didn't know to ask for that, or really high rates, or, you know, something like that. So I think you want to take your time with property especially, but the others, you can start with a little bit. You know, the limit on most share trading platforms over here is $500, which is not a lot for an average Australian. I think the minimum wage is $670 a week or something like that. So that's, you know, it's less than a week's earnings for some people, most people, if they've got a full-time job. And then, of course, there are those micro trading apps where you can start with, you know, $10, that kind of stuff. So, you know, you can start small and work up. Property is probably the only one that you need to be very careful with before you commit.
Yep. I think this generation is at a very lucky period in time where you actually have this kind of platforms. This did not exist back then, where people
Exactly.
were not able to have those virtual simulations where they can test it out. Very, very nice.
Exactly.
Very, very nice. So you one of the things we need to look into is, yes, safe. I think the other one you said is buy assets. What's the third one again?
Avoid bad debt. Yeah.
Avoid
So
bad.
that's that buy now, pay later.
Yeah.
And look, to be honest, it's fine to have that debt if you pay it off in full before you pay fees or interest. So I still have credit cards. I
Yep.
use them. I like the fraud protection and the convenience that I get with a credit card, but I have signed on to my bank to pay them off in full each month, so I never pay interest. So when I say bad debt, I'm talking about paying interest on things that aren't assets.
Yes.
Which is pretty much everything that's not like for property or shares or bonds or things like that, right? So pretty much anything that you'd put through your credit card is generally bad debt as opposed to good debt being for assets.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can still have those forms of debt if you use them wisely. Just don't pay interest. Don't make future you give up that lifestyle.
Yeah. Those interests build up very quickly. Like if you have not encountered it, you will underestimate the speed it can build up at. But
exactly. Well, I'll give you an example in Australia. So a common interest rate is about 18% on a credit card. They can vary from anything from 9 to 29, but 18 is pretty common. So if you put $10,000 on a credit card, let's say you go on a holiday and you pay it off of what we call the minimum repayment. So they start out at about $200 a month, right? Minimum repayments, you just keep paying it off. In the end, that $10,000 will be $36,000 and it will take you 44 years to pay it off.
Yep.
If you just follow minimum repayments, just to give you an idea of the volume. So suddenly that $10,000 holiday better have been worth 36 grand. And imagine carrying that around for 44 years. It'd be horrible. So yeah, I think people have got to be aware of the magnitude. Those high interest loans. And that's where I think buy now, pay later is quite interesting because they've gone for low or no interest, but then they just charge you fees.
Yes.
And the fees are pretty much the same.
Yes.
So yeah.
If it looks too good to be true, it's probably not good for you.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable assumption.
With regards to the investments, like what you shared earlier, if it looks too good to be true, I think one thing I face is that young people don't actually know what is too good to be true.
Yeah.
So what is a benchmark that we can look at that goes like, yeah, that makes no sense?
Well, it's definitely then worth looking at data for the asset that you're interested in. So for example, if I was buying shares on the Australian Securities Exchange, the ASX, I'd be wanting to have a look at trends for the ASX overall and for individual sectors that I'm looking at. Now, we know historically that there are years when the share market goes down.
Yeah.
But overall, it delivers somewhere between 7 and 10%.
Yes.
Right. Now, it depends on how you account for inflation and it depends on how you account for things like fees and taxes. But, it's sort of 7%-ish is reasonable assumption for ASX-based shares. Now, every stock exchange is different because every country is different. Yeah. So you can't take that 7% and apply it to other countries. You've got to go and have a look.
Yeah.
And look at the particular stocks you're interested in. And then again, with property, we can look at property data in Australia. And what property data does is quite often it does like this little steady, and then it goes a blip, and then it goes a little blip again, and then it does this. And there are periods when it does go down.
Yeah.
But generally with property, you'd be looking at 10 plus years ownership because of the cost. It's quite expensive to get into property in Australia. It's about 5%. You pay stamp duty, you pay agents fees, all that stuff. It's big money. So people tend to hold it for a long time to recoup those costs. Yep. So look, plenty of people have bought property in Australia and it's gone down because they've bought at a bad time, just unlucky. There's been the global financial crisis or a mining downturn in Western Australia because that really affects our housing prices. So there's no guarantee it's going to go up, right? But over the long term, you can still say it's a similar sort of growth rate, sort of that 7 to 10%, depending on where you are. But it's mostly capital cities. I think the interesting thing that differentiates property from shares in terms of wealth is that because you get that leverage, so you put down a 20% deposit and you make an 80% loan, it's the most common arrangement over here, you get all the growth. So you can make more money quickly in property if prices go up. But I think the other part of this is you should never be using money that is something you're going to need for rent tomorrow or for food, right? It should always be money that you can afford to be locked up, because you might just have bad timing and you buy when there is a downturn, and then you've just got to wait it out most of the time rather than selling and taking your loss. So I think being prepared for that, being mentally prepared for it's really important. And we've got a generation of Australians, like I mentioned, who've had 30 years of growth. That's unheard of. We usually have like a 5 to 8 year cycle. So they're all used to, every 5 to 8 years you get a recession. We haven't had a proper one. Like I thought COVID was going to do it, but it's literally like this, going straight back up. So I was like, we're finally going to learn what a recession looks like. So there's this whole generation of people, like I'm 40, there's people that have never, can't remember a recession. So when they see it coming, it's really daunting. And of course, we're about to enter a period that might be like that globally. So I think being prepared for that, but also recognizing that can also, and I know it sounds a little bit malicious. No, maybe not malicious. Maybe it's a little bit opportunistic. It could be a fire sale coming. There could be some cheap shares and some cheap properties if there's a proper recession. So if you're well set up, it might be a good chance to quickly increase your net wealth.
Yes.
Not that I think it's worth timing the market, because good luck picking the bottom. But just being aware that if you did buy, this year, maybe the markets will be okay, and then next year it'll be a slight downturn. But you don't care about that. You care about the 10 to 20 year returns, and over long periods. So long as people need somewhere to live and places to run their businesses, property is still probably going to have value. And as Mark Twain said, buy land. They're not making it anymore. And then on the share side, so long as people are going to want to take raw materials and add value to them, and even human time and add value to that and create, as we're going to see growth in our economy. So the fundamental underlying principles of those don't change. They just have these hiccups. So long as you're comfortable with that, then that's okay. Be willing to take the shot, I reckon.
Yes, I agree. All right. Very, very, very nicely said. We are coming towards the end of our time. So I guess I will ask you one final question, like to wrap up the whole thing. One habit, since we talked a lot about habits, one habit that we should all start implementing today, and how that you would recommend, because there's so many of them. You can never finish talking about them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so long as you've got an automated savings plan, I won't talk about that as a habit, because I feel like the automated saving, then you don't have to consciously manage it. It'll just happen. What I do think a good habit with is on spending. Whether it's once every few months you look at your bank statement and you go through and critically go, did I get value out of that? So am I using that subscription anymore? I think it's very easy to add. So I think you can do either a review where you consciously, and I would say once every 3 months is a good amount of time, because you'll see most subscriptions come through in that time, and you can think about, am I actually watching enough on that thing to make that subscription worth it, or am I using that gym membership, whatever it might be. So that's one way to do it. Or the other thing is to introduce a time break between when you think you might want to buy something and when you actually spend the money. So the first time you put it in the shopping cart, you don't buy it. Right? It has to be important enough that a week later you go, yep, I still want it. So I find that is a very good sort of circuit break, and it does require active decision making. You do have to make it a habit, but it's a good circuit break for not frivolously spending money, because that money took you time to earn. So every time you waste it, you're wasting your time, and time is your most precious non-renewable resource. So I think if you know you're susceptible to impulse spending or overspending, then anything you can do to put rules around, well, I don't buy it the first time. Not the first time I see it in the shops, not the first time I click on the cart, nothing. I give myself a day, a week, a month, whatever it is before I go back, because then I have to really want it. It has to be a conscious choice. It's not just I clicked on an ad. It's not just I went, oh, that's good, which we all do. It's just making sure that you have this rule for yourself that says, no, I don't buy it on the first time, and you won't miss out. There's always another one. There always is another chance.
There's always something better, bigger, all of that, or something that is more relevant to you.
Exactly.
I like what you said about reviewing it, because it reminds me, I think, was it Marie Kondo who had the house thing where you tidy it up and you go this spark joy. Similarly, go through your statements and go do I still want this? Does it still spark joy for me? I think you can do the same for your money as well. Very, very nice.
Exactly. And do treat it like a Marie Kondo moment. Do treat it like a purging, I let this thing go because it's not satisfying me. And it's just recognizing that money and time are finite resources. You need to make the most of them.
Yeah.
You need to do the best you can with what you've got and not wastefully let them fritter away. And I think that's the problem. It's all gotten so easy to sign up for this subscription that's so tiny that you don't notice it. But then when you add it up, you're like, oh, wow, it's a lot of money. So
Yes.
yeah, do let that go. Do the Marie Kondo, do purge and feel lighter for it and happier for it. And then you can put your money to the best use possible for you.
Yes, agreed. So before we end our session today, I would love if you can just share a little bit about your book and how can our audiences here today, if they would like to get it, how can they go about getting it? And yeah, and how can we be in touch with you?
Yeah, lovely. And I think a little Easter egg for everybody. We've met, Mathura, because of the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards, where you were a runner-up as the best influencer in 2022. So lucky us. And my book was the best book in the best book category.
Yeah.
So that's the book sitting there behind me for anyone who sees the screen. It's called Money School, which is the name of my business. It's published through Penguin Random House, and it's available on most outlets. I think mostly paperback in Australia, but you can get the audiobook, which is me reading it, or the ebook anywhere you buy those internationally. So feel free to check it out if you like, or maybe ask for a copy in your library if you want to be frugal and follow the financial independence way. Yeah, and in that book, I go through basically those 3 rules and then what to do when you're time rich. So it's a purely educational book, and everything I do is education. So if you go to moneyschool.org.au, you'll see lots of blogs, and I've got courses for people that are interested in those. Do lots of media as well, so feel free to read some articles, and I will be delighted to be putting this podcast in there because it's been such fun. And yeah, please do stay in touch via social media wherever you've got it. Money School org for most of them. I think it's Money School on LinkedIn. I'm on all the boring old people ones though. Sorry, I'm not on TikTok or anything like that.
Well, LinkedIn is the new thing, so everybody's.
I hope so.
I have so
like
many
LinkedIn.
youngsters who are like in school, but they already have a very well-built LinkedIn profile. So yeah,
Awesome.
LinkedIn is the new thing now.
Well, I'm so delighted to hear that because I love LinkedIn. It's my favorite social media platform, which makes me a giant nerd. And I'm delighted to hear that young people are into it as well. That's cool. I'll see you there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Lacey, for being a guest speaker on Money Matters. I had a lot of fun having this conversation with you. And for all of you watching, the links that Lacey mentioned, I'll definitely drop it in the description as well. So click on it and check it out as well. So yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Mathura. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Have a nice day, guys.